Thank you all for joining us. We're very excited to be here with you all today as part of a series that has been going on with JSS, talking through the wonderful world of Shochu. My name is Ryan Chetiyawardana, or Mr. Lyan. I'm a bartender based in London, and I'm incredibly excited to be joining here today, not only because we get to talk about a topic that is incredibly exciting to me. I had the opportunity to visit Japan with the JSS Association in November 2019. And it was not only a chance to kind of bolster my knowledge around the spirit, but it really reinforced my excitement about it. So we're going to talk through some of that today, and we're going to focus on one of the things that I think is central to our whole industry, and that's flavor and how we can explore it a little bit more, and what the world of Shochu brings to the bartending repertoire in terms of spirits, opportunities, cocktails, the lot. But what's extra exciting about this is I get to do this with some of my very dearest friends, people that have been long extended Lyan fam, and people that have been huge influences for me over the years. So it's a wonderful opportunity to be able to talk through this topic, something that we find particularly exciting, but with incredible friends. So first up, we have Dr. Arielle Johnson. My description of Arielle, and we've been, it's over 10 years I've had the opportunity to be able to learn from, collaborate with, and be inspired by Arielle. I often described her as being a flavor wizard, and that definitely does talk about like some of the magic she brings, but I think it doesn't quite do justice to all of her brilliance. But what's really exciting, with one of the most incredible kind of CVs in terms of food, drink, and flavor in the business, she is condensing this into a forthcoming book. So something to be very excited about. When that drops, it's going to be a game changer for chefs, bartenders, and anybody interested in food or flavor alike. So away from Dr. Arielle Johnson over in New York. I don't know if there's anything additional that
I'm like blushing. No, I mean, like, can you come and introduce me everywhere I go?
I can be hype man for you anytime. And then also joining from New York, we have Mr. Aidan Bowie. So somebody who was working with us over in London for a number of years. He kicked off Dandelion with us. He's been a very dear friend, and is one of the most talented bartenders I've had the opportunity to work with. A wonderful host, very talented mixologist, and actually just an all-round good egg. Now over in Dead Rabbit in New York, and slinging cocktails for you there if you get a chance to go and see him and try some of their delicious drinks. Aidan, did I miss anything else that probably should also be described for you?
No, you nailed it. Thank you. Again, you can kind of hang out with me.
Okay. So we're here today to talk about Shochu. I think all of you have gathered that by the invite, and I think some of you will have been fortunate enough to receive some tasting packs. So there is a chance for you to taste along. We're not going to be doing a tutor tasting as such through this. The team are going to reference some of the flavors, and we're going to use it as a bit of a guide for, I suppose, demonstrating the breadth that lies within the Shochu category. But actually, we're here to just have a discussion about what excites us about the spirit. It's something that, I kicked off with beginning before. I was fortunate to go see in situ, meet some of the makers, and understand the way it fits within Japanese culture, and how important it is to them as their distilled spirit, their original distilled spirit. But it was really something that, it's been exciting to me as a bartender. It's something that, as I've learned more, it's kicked off more about the way that I'm intrigued to look at where we have origin points of flavor, and where we can start to see that, being kind of exemplified by, people who are passionate producers, but also something that gives, I suppose, a new product to the kind of toolbox. If you think about bartending, classic cocktails, a lot of them fall into kind of quite a narrow range of spirit categories. So what does it mean to have something new come to the table like Shochu, and the variety that exists in the category? What can it mean for us in terms of some of those cocktails? And we're fortunate to have Aidan actually mixing up a cocktail for us today. But I think one of the things that we also wanted to talk about was the newness of this as a category. So we'll touch upon what Shochu is a bit. I know that there's some amazing resources out there that you can kind of go to. And actually, if you click on shochu.guide, we're going to talk a bit about the competition later, but there's a wealth of information there. But this has been dubbed as one of the hottest categories for a while now. And I think one of the things that we were intrigued to kick off, and I'll pitch this over to Aidan and Arielle to begin, is why do we think it's not kicked off as kind of like a major spirit category within cocktails? You might visit a couple of places that you'll see it on a cocktail list. You might see it as a modifier. You might see it particularly within Japanese kind of focused venues. You might see shochu featured a bit more. But why is this not sitting on some of the most celebrated kind of menus around the world? One of the things that we've talked about in the past is potentially is there like the difficulty of a language barrier. You pick up the bottle, it's not so clear what exactly it is and what it's made from, what could potentially be the flavor profile, and is that difficult to pass on to our guests? But actually, could it be as well that there isn't just enough information around it? And that's what's exciting to me about being able to participate in these talks, but also to have something like the Shochu Guide bring forth a lot of information about it. So for those of you who are new to the category, you can understand how it's made, where it's made, and how it's traditionally consumed. But Aidan, Arielle, is there any particular thoughts that you have around it as a product? And we've talked about in the title of this, whether it's the new Mezcal, but is there anything that you think is kind of been a bit of a difficulty for it as it's trying to break through?
So I think for me personally, again, with a lot of like kind of classic cocktail recipes, like you were kind of referencing, it goes towards certainly like when I was starting to make drinks in London, you have your gin drinks, your whiskey drinks, your tequila drinks, and menus were kind of categorized like that. And honestly, the talks that these talks that have been putting on over the last couple of years have really kind of opened my eyes to it as a category. Obviously, it's been around for 500 years, and it's my kind of naivety as a bartender. But I think the way that the cocktail industry is going, and the way that we care a lot about flavor and how to kind of find ways of really like either layering on flavors to make other flavors pop, or also to kind of to highlight certain ingredients. And for me, this shochu works perfectly in that. You're getting a raw ingredient and you're able to kind of like taste exactly what that ingredient is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, being a single distilled product, you're closer to those raw materials. And it's a really interesting thing to then see how does that reflect or change when you start to mix it in cocktails. Just quickly before we jump over to Arielle, like when you were first starting to mix with it, you don't have that, I suppose, canon of classic cocktails around shochu. Well, we don't particularly in the West. Was there anything that, beyond the original substitution and trying it in some of those kind of classic serves, was there something that you had originally gravitated towards in terms of trying to use it?
Yeah, I would. I think that's a great question. Like New York has a really like great range of different kind of classic cocktail bars, but it also has a lot of really cool Japanese bars. So I would go to like the beauty about going to a new city is seeing how people are drinking and how they're making drinks. So I would go to those bars. I would spend time in Angel Share and spend time in Bar Goto and drink the drinks and find out how people are using them, and then go from there.
Nice. Arielle, any thoughts on kind of, I suppose, shochu as a category and potentially things to compare it to, or what's kind of been a reason for it both having success or struggling to kind of break through onto some of those menus to begin with?
In terms of like why it's like not better known in or like more familiar in the US and Europe, I mean, I think with a lot of these things, there's a real knock-on effect where like things that people talk about are things that people talk about. So like as soon as something kind of like breaches the consciousness at some level, then it almost like accelerates or increases exponentially like the amount of attention that gets paid to it. I mean, so I remember like in 2008 going to the Star Chefs conference in New York and listening to Audrey Saunders describe gin as the other white meat. So basically like at that point bartenders were still trying to get people excited about using gin, which sounds crazy now, but that was only like 14 years ago. Yes. So like, I mean, I think we are looking at like a somewhat compressed timeline, or we tend to like focus like very tightly on the now. I mean, I think also like I mean, as you know, as I didn't touch on, there's like not really like a classic repertoire of shochu cocktails, and I think that's often how people get introduced to a spirit, even if they end up like perhaps later on drinking it straight mostly, or you know, sipping it, is through cocktails. And you know, even not that I've been to like you know, every great cocktail bar in Japan, but like most of them don't really work with shochu that much. The main exception being Gen Yamamoto, who does quite a bit with shochus and very like fresh fruits and low alcohol drinks. So I think that was actually the first place I drank that I ever like really got into shochu, because you know, you like go in and there you order cocktails and like a tasting flight. And he like, you know, explains each one to you. And so like that was the kind of yeah, like I never had introduction to it like that before. So yeah, I think it's not so much that it's like not there yet as like it's you know, on like a lower part of the curve of perception. But yeah, I mean, in terms of flavors, like mezcal is an apt comparison. I would say like even more like tequilas is the, not that it's like the same as it or even like similar, but the kind of like interplay of like fruity and vegetal and grainy and you know, stuff that's maybe a little different from like a whiskey or something like that, is kind of in the same ballpark as that.
Yeah, and I think when we were talking in the preliminary discussion about this, we were talking about, you know, when you're trying to understand something new, comparison is obviously one of the easiest ways to start to look at where it can work, where it can fit in terms of what you already understand. And we talked about a sense of place and a sense of choice that comes in, and I think that's where you kind of drew a lot of the kind of comparisons with mezcal and those different points at which you're getting those producers.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's you know, since it's like an unaged generally product, you know, you're not getting much from wood or from aging regimes, and like so much from you know, both like the flavor of whatever, you know, rice or sweet potato or barley is like getting grown into place, like the choice of the like fungus and yeast used to, you know, ferment and well, double ferment it. And then any kind of like, you know, local microbial terroir that's gonna affect it. And yeah, no, I think it's like really like beautiful how much that comes through from something that comes from like, you know, a grain or a sweet potato, which is like not necessarily the most exciting like starting product flavor wise.
Yeah, and I think as well, it's interesting when you start to look at the white spirit category. You know, there's some kind of aged spirits that have started to kind of transition into that white spirit space, and I think a lot of that has come down to kind of ease of application, both in terms of cocktails, but also in terms of kind of general consumer mindset. How to use those spirits is a little bit more familiar, and I think it's really fascinating to look at something like shochu, where you're getting not only this kind of variety of choice in terms of the producer, and I think we'll come back to that point in a sec, but the aspect of complexity and concentration of flavor within something. And I think it's really interesting where you start to think about drawing comparisons, and a lot of those, you know, white spirits, highly distilled, you're removing those kind of like points, you're getting further removed from that point of origin, and you're kind of not necessarily tasting all those same choices. You know, you've got, as we talked about in the prelim, you know, with an aged spirit, you've got the influence of the wood. With a, you know, a botanical spirit, you've got the influence of all of those different herbs and spices. Whereas with something like a single distilled spirit, you're getting that opportunity to have some of that robustness, some of that texture and that weight to it, but it's got the versatility of a white spirit. And I think that's something that's been kind of interest to all of us from both a kind of application point of view, a cocktail usage point of view, but also a flavor point of view. You know, what does it mean to have something that is kind of straddling those two kind of points of a, you know, the complexity of an aged spirit with the lightness of a white spirit? Is there anything that's kind of, you know, in terms of the intrigue, what drew you initially in terms of some of those?
Oh, me? Or I mean, I just talked. I think Aidan should. I
Sorry.
should.
Yeah, for me, I read there was an article that Don posted on the website, and I read it, and it was kind of really fascinating. There's four main points. You've got your distillation, you've got what type of koji you're using, you've got what type of ingredient it is, and I think that it's really fascinating to like put products side by side that maybe three of the four are the same, but then one is used a certain type of kind of distillation, and coming out at a different ABV, and seeing how vastly different the two products are. I think it's really fascinating, and that kind of goes around the same route that you were talking about with mezcal, where you've got kind of different plants that are being aged for certain times.
Yeah, I think it's that point of choice, and it's really nice to be able to have several varieties in front of you when you're getting new to a category. Even if it's something like whiskey, tasting one point in it doesn't really give you a reflection of the full gamut. And I think what's really exciting about shochu is the breadth of the category, and being able to try different points within it, and be that different place of origin, different source materials in terms of the sugars and the starting points, be it kind of the choice in distillation style, and then the dilution as well. You're getting a huge range of products. So being able to try different ones helps you kind of pinpoint not only towards where your preference might be, but also down to how you're going to apply it. It's not simply a case of, just straight substitution, because we're not talking about kind of like a neutral spirit. So you can't really always just plug and play. I think it's all about kind of choosing the particular shochu for the task you're actually trying to kind of move towards. And I think that's one of the things that really excited me. I don't really like using spirits in a kind of generic way. So when you've got something that kind of demands it off you, it's really exciting. And I think what's kind of fun about kind of shochu is, this was something that always fascinated me as I suppose a lover of spirits, was seeing those choices and having it reflected in something that I can understand and taste. There is something that's an ancient spirit here. There's tons of expertise that's built up, and each of these producers do that. They talk about either their place of origin. They start to add all of these different nuances where they're reflecting their own choices. So within shochu, we talked about this in terms of the origin points, the big categories being things like sweet potato, rice, barley, but you can get anything from chestnuts to buckwheat. You can do combinations, and that to me is really exciting, particularly with being able to see the kind of approach in the agriculture, where you're getting regions that are very specific to certain crops, growers that are trying to produce these to reflect the soil or a certain kind of aspect of their terroir, and just having that breadth as the starting point, to me is really exciting. And using like a barley shochu versus a sweet potato, to me is a really interesting excitement in terms of how am I applying it? What are the flavors that I want to start eking out from there? But I think one of the things that makes it really unique, apart from that starting point, is then the choice of like processing of this. And we've got somebody here who's, I suppose, probably the most, I think Aidan, you and I have both experimented with and have been fascinated by things like Koji and other sacrificing molds. But to really understand a bit more about it, I think, we've got a handball to Arielle here. So, with the shochu producers, they are, another step in the journey of choice they're making is the style of Koji they're using to break down their source materials. Now, that's obviously very different to Western spirits. It's not something that's kind of classically employed in our whiskey, vodka, brandy productions. How much of a difference, and what are the applications of choice of flavor are they doing when they're using Koji in this process?
Yeah, well, so to take like to pull back just a little bit, if you're making so I like to think about molecules a lot. I know sometimes that gives people like bad, terrible chemistry class, high school flashbacks, but I promise they're friendly. But yeah, so like I think in terms of molecules a lot, and like to get an alcoholic beverage, like you've got to have sugar. That's like the biochemical transformation that's like at the key of all of this, is that like you have something that's sugary, and then the sugar gets transformed into alcohol. And And you know, there's so like any kind of like fermented or distilled product, like you need to figure out first and foremost how to like get at the sugar. And so if you're like fermenting fruit, that's pretty easy because like the sugar is right there. You know, with agave based spirits, you have sugar bound up in these like very long sort of soluble fiber molecules, and you basically just, you know, bake or smoke the piña of the agave for a very long time to like free up those sugars. With many things made from barley, you're just taking advantage of the fact that like it's full of starch. Starches are just long chains of sugars, and the barley itself has enzymes that will like liberate the sugars from the starches, and that is malting. So for Koji based spirits, you're also starting from starches, but then you're using a fungus instead of the like internal enzymes in the seed, in the grain. So, you know, like I guess like on the topic of molecules, something that really excites me about well, both sake and shochu, but especially shochu, is like how much the flavors that are there are really the product of transformation and like the flavors of transformation. So like shochu, the flavors that you end up with are like truly reflective, not so much of like, okay, well, we like have all these flavor molecules that we can already taste in you know, the barley or the sweet potato or the other grains that we're using, but rather that by taking those materials and putting them through several transformation steps, first, you know, growing a particular strain of aspergillus on the starting, you know, sweet potatoes or grains to make koji, and then, you know, fermenting with whatever type of yeast or like mixed yeast culture you want to do, and then finally the distillation method. Like every choice you make there will affect how you know, quite literally, how the molecules inside of the grains or inside of your, you know, mash or whatever are getting transformed into things that you can taste. And, you know, on a much more macro level, like you can literally taste and smell and experience as flavor every decision and every transformation that you make. So with distillation, that's kind of like the least biological or like non-biological step. So you're not thinking about enzymes at all, but you know, basically distillation, you're taking, to get like very you know, physical chemistry, but fundamental about it, you're taking liquid and then you're heating it up so it becomes a gas, and then you're collecting it, condensing it back down into a liquid again. So the like original way that developed was just to apply a lot of heat to, you know, basically physically excite all the molecules in, you know, beer or wine or sake, and get them to become a gas and then condense down. But eventually people figured out that to like add enough energy to be able to distill, you could either like heat something up a lot, or you could just like remove the effect of 30 or however many layers of atmosphere kind of weighing down on your distillation pot. So what I'm getting at in a very long-winded way is like reduced pressure distillation. So, you know, there's definitely people experimenting with that in other distilled beverages, but the choice of reduced pressure versus atmospheric pressure is like very endemic and very sophisticated in shochu production. And one reason why you'd make that choice of using like a reduced pressure distillation is like applying heat to molecules, flavor molecules included, you know, gives them a lot of energy, so they bounce around and become gaseous so you can collect them. But it can also then like trigger further chemical reactions, maybe ones that you want, maybe ones that you don't want. So by reducing the pressure in the distillation and therefore being able to like reduce the heat, you actually can kind of dial in what level of like thermal transformation you're adding. So, you know, that can, you know, stop some flavor molecules from oxidizing, like prevent maybe the formation of any kind of like slightly like caramelized compounds on the inside of the still, like, and also you know, the most like fleeting of molecules, you're not heating them up very much, so they're like easier to catch. So yeah, just like thinking about that when I'm drinking is very exciting to me.
Well, and I think people have become more familiar with low temperature, low pressure distillations, partly through kind of things like Rodavap's becoming more. Sounds weird to call them commonplace in kind of culinary circles, but more familiar.
Which is hilarious because a Rodavap is actually like terrible for what people use it for, and great at what it's designed for in a chemistry lab, which is like collecting solvent and then throwing it out. But yeah, no. Okay.
But even intuitively, people understand, I think, a cold infusion versus a hot. But I think the advent of Koji, do you think, again, this has become a word that is more commonplace now, and people have understood it to be an interim step or used in the production of a lot of their favorite foodstuffs or new favorite spirits. But in terms of that process, because it's not simply a like malting process. It's not simply about like using enzymes to cleave and make those sugars more available. It also is a flavor step, and it's a choice for these producers. So, the common application of black, white, or yellow Koji, and the opportunity for microbial terroir that could exist around this as well. But what do you really, for those out there who are kind of new to this, what is it helping add for those producers? What is it giving them as a kind of new flavor choice?
Yeah, well, so something that Koji does is so first, most of the flavor is actually aroma, and aroma molecules, we need like very, very, very tiny amounts of them to be able to smell. So like a Koji fermentation or yeast fermentation might produce like grams or liters of sugar or alcohol, and you might be then as basically as like an accident or an impurity, frankly, from like a biochemical standpoint, producing like nanograms of some like furanoid or an ester or some other volatile molecule. But like we don't need that much of them to be able to smell. So I mean, basically what you're smelling and the flavor that you can experience in a Koji fermentation are actually like side products of the like basic life-giving metabolism of the fungus. So like the fungus exists to find some starch and some protein, and then break them down to use for energy and use for growing. But there's like dozens, hundreds, thousands of other biochemical processes going on to like regulate the amount of free fatty acids inside of the cell versus outside of the cell, or many, many other things. And so like the degree to which one strain or another is like more biased towards like sending those down one biochemical pathway or another is going to like hugely affect the flavor that you get. So yeah, I mean, growing Koji is really about kind of nurturing this life cycle of the Aspergillus mold that you're using. But a lot of the choices you make, which you make kind of empirically, in the sense of like trying it out and seeing what happens, is like, okay, does the maybe slightly like floral byproducts that this strain produces, does it like match well with maybe like the sweet potato that I'm growing stuff on, or do I want something that's like fruitier and drier? And all of those are choices that you can make. And like I think a lot of Koji producers have actually like have like done a ton of analysis on like both what flavors are produced during the growth of the Koji, but also like it might these fungi will sometimes like make other molecules that don't have a flavor, but then once you add yeast, the yeast will transform that molecule into like stuff that has a flavor. So you're kind of both like building flavor in a literal way with the Koji, but also like packing some starting materials in for insurance to kind of like use for flavor later. So yeah, I mean, so you're like in selecting a strain, always thinking about like some of these aromas that it produces, how is it going to like harmonize with the flavor of what I'm growing the mold on? How is it going to like transform different bases like a barley or a rice or a sweet potato differently? Maybe they have stuff that once the fungus chews on it a little bit, it like also gains a flavor that it didn't have before. And then like finally, how's that going to interact with the yeast fermentation that we're doing?
And I think what's fascinating about this, again, you're talking about all those different choice points, but it's not linear with it. If I think about like sweet potato as a mash, it's really tropical. And some producers obviously go down that path and they have this delicacy, you get all those like gentle floral notes, those tropical notes, but others kind of choose to subvert that. So you get this like tropically note with body and richness and depth to it. And I think this is the opportunity that there is with all of these different choice points, is going, well, I can take something like my, like brown sugar, and I can actually pull out a lot of that delicacy that exists within it as a base, or I can decide to make it rich and deep and funky, and but yet still it's got that kind of versatility as a white spirit, because it's not then kind of further having any additions kind of added to it. It's just really taking those different choice points and just honing in on it and into a particular reflection. I think that's what's both fascinating about the kind of the category, but also why there is so much versatility.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting things that kind of can hit a high low. You've got something that's got tons of kind of like brightness in terms of the kind of aroma, but it's also got a really super creamy kind of flavor profile on the back of it. So this is one of the things that I suppose is really exciting from a cocktail and application point of view. So I know, Aidan, you're going to talk us through kind of one of those kind of applications in a second. But do you want to just kind of quickly, before you do that, do you want to chat about some of the shochus that you both were tasting? You have some in front of you, some are with our guests on who have been tasting along. And then talk about that choice, what you've decided to pick out for the cocktail that you're going to be demonstrating for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Arielle, thank you. That was amazing. And I think that was like the perfect segue to kind of talk about this, because we've got two here that are very similar, but then they've been done with different water kind of dilutions, so you can really kind of home in and taste on the differences. This is the first one that we're going to be tasting, the Kuradashi Genshu Shochu, and this is a mix of sweet potato and rice. I'll also be making the cocktail for this one as well. And then I'm going to pour, if everybody has a second glass, I'm going to pour the second one as well out, just so that we can kind of compare the two together, which I think is a really nice thing to do. So again, here, this is going to be the same. It's 83%, sorry, wrong way, 83% sweet potato and 17% rice. And both are using white Koji. This one is slightly lower in ABV, so it's going to be 24%. This is the Akamao. We should go with the first one we poured out first, the Kuradashi Genshu. And what I get on the nose of this is like super forward with like a lot of the sweet potato flavor. So very like chocolatey, rich, malty, nutty. Definitely like perception of like savory notes as well. Do you have the same products, Arielle?
I don't think I have that one, unfortunately. But I'll just have to.
Good.
Yeah. I'll just come over after and.
Well, I think for anybody who is able to taste along, like as Aidan said, like that Pepsi challenge of it, like not even if you've got the same product as like, and the difference is the dilution, you see such a change in this as a product, and being able to compare the different material starting points, the Koji, the style of distillation, the dilution, all of these things, like they really start to affect a lot in terms of the aroma, the weight, and just the general kind of texture of them as a spirit. So hopefully you get a chance to have a couple in front of you at some point.
And then like exactly as you said, for the second one, all of those like rich malty notes are like completely reduced. So here it's kind of like tropical fruits like mango, pineapple, honey, and I guess just the lower ABV helps to highlight that as well. So kind of what you were saying, like that tropical mash that you get with butternut, some sweet potato. Yeah.
It's always been a bit of a holy grail in terms of kind of flavor notes for me. Getting, you know, some of those tropical fruit notes in spirits is, you know, it's a real joy when you're starting to apply it. Is there anything that, like, you know, it initially took you towards when you were looking at these and thinking about a cocktail?
Again, I wanted to like look at them for exactly like what they were, and kind of similar to what you were talking about earlier. You tend to kind of like pigeonhole products, and like this is because this is like a Scotch, this is going to taste like this. And I felt like here it was kind of important just to take a step back, really taste them, really like, you know, like write down all my notes and then go back into it again and talk to other people about them as well. For the Kuradashi, the Genshu, when I tasted it, I figured like it was like very like applicable to like a hot toddy or something like that. So I'm going to actually make a twist on. I'm going to make a hot drink with this. It's New York's turned super cold, so I figured it was kind of like the perfect time to do that. You know.
Nice. Talk us through it.
Yeah. So I did like a bunch of research, and I figured it would be like nice to make like a nice kind of simple style toddy. So this is inspired by Aviary, which is shochu plus hot water. And I think it's like a really nice way of opening up flavors, particularly in sweet potato shochus. It works well because of the aroma and because of the sweetness. So I made like a brown sugar syrup with Okinawa sugar. So I love that sugar. It's like very rich, like molassesy, nutty, a lot of the same notes that are prominent in the shochu. So the shochu with the syrup, I added a dash of tamarai in it as well, and that's just going to give it earthiness, like a little bit of structure. And then I topped up with some warm barley tea. So like very malty and kind of like marmitey almost, you know. Yeah, it's cool. And so I guess when I was doing research, there's like a lot of ways, like ratio is so important, right? In terms of kind of how much shochu to hot water. So I did 1 part of the shochu to 2 parts of the kind of hot water. I did it a couple of nights ago, and I've left it kind of sitting in at room temp, and that's like a really great way for all the flavors to marry and kind of like form well together. And I guess throughout the talk I've had it on like a low heat on the pan, so my house smells amazing. But I'll get it for you now if you just give me 2 seconds.
Yeah, of course. I suppose it's a nice marriage of both kind of, I suppose, how it's traditionally drunk in Japan, and an old Scotch serve of you know, a winter warmer when it starts to get miserable out. But
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, if you can give us a little overview of the recipe, I'd say for those of you trying, Aidan's cocktails are always worth having a go at, and hopefully this is something that you can do your own version of at home. And even if you've got a different shochu to hand, I think this is going to be a really nice way of seeing how it behaves when it's opened up in this manner. You know, drinking spirits with warm water wasn't something I was kind of familiar with before I went out to Japan. And, you know, obviously you understand the way it blossoms aromas, helps cleave them apart, helps release some of those things is something that you might have experienced in terms of, you know, a tea or coffee or something like that. But being able to have it with the spirit and what it then starts to open up is really fascinating. So actually all those choices, all of those flavors that we talked about, just drinking it with hot water will give you a nice way of comparing different styles of shochu. But this is a cocktail is something that I would recommend you having a go at.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I'd looked at I remember I was in this beautiful Japanese restaurant in London, and then one of the dishes was sweet potato, and it'd been glazed with soy and some form of syrup. And I just potatoes are a great kind of carrier of flavor, right? So I kind of wanted to recreate that in the cocktail. But you can see it's served like there's just with a wedge of orange. The wedge of orange is going to give like a little bit of brightness and acidity to the drink, but it's like very malty, and yeah. And I'll share the recipe after this, but I figured the conversation was pretty good, so I wanted to make something that was batched and quick to do so we could carry on talking.
Awesome. And yeah, again, something that I would thoroughly recommend you having a go at is, try the spirit, but also then just try it with changing the temperature and the dilution. What that brings to like open up the spirit and pull out different aspects is something I really love about mixing out the various styles of shochu.
There's a famous poet called Bukusu Wakayama, and he wrote this like short little poem about a whiskey Aviary, and it is like pouring the hot water into the whiskey, the fragrance suddenly rises in light of a cold white morning. I thought it was really pretty,
nice.
Like, yeah. So yeah, it was cool. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we got to dive into some questions because we're getting closer towards the end of the chat, and I want to make sure that there's an opportunity to talk through some things. And there's been some great questions so far. I think we'll kick off with Warren's one, because I think it's a really lovely one, not only about, I suppose, how do we kind of explore spirits as a category, but what could this mean for shochu? So for those of you who haven't seen the question, it was particularly looking at other spirits and where they've broken through. There was the use of kind of substitution. It was a great way of helping people understand the application and where it works and what it brings to the table. This is something certainly that single malts did when they first started really encouraging people to kind of play with them and use them in their cocktails. And actually the example that Warren gave was about Mezcal, and as people were starting to get introduced, they would use it in some of those kind of familiar forms, be it a agave old fashioned or a Mezcal Negroni, and it helps people understand what is it doing differently. And the question is there a single cocktail serve for shochu that might act as an accelerant and help people understand the category a little bit more? It's a great question, and I'm going to handball it to you two in a sec, but I think from my perspective, I think this is always difficult. Like it's when you've got something very wide as a spirit category, it's difficult to find a singular thing to help it sing. That was a terrible sentence. It's hard to find like that one catch-all cocktail for it. But to me, for this, it's about the simplicity. You could do it in something like a daiquiri and seeing how using citrus, that brightness helps open it out. But because of the different range of textures and gentle aromatics that come with it, I would actually probably serve it more like a mizuwari, just opening it up with dilution and actually serving it at different temperatures. That to me is, I suppose it's quite an austere serve. It's not something that's, you're not using sugar or citrus or lots of fruit flavors to kind of help make it a bit more accessible. And perhaps not everyone is used to drinking, spirit and water. But to me, it's a really fascinating way of demonstrating some of the more subtle notes to it. So, we talked about some of those tropical fruit notes. You get lots of citrus. You get, in terms of like different flavor notes that I would categorize within shochu, it's to that bright end. It's, as Aidan garnished it with the orange, you're getting some of that citrus characteristic. You're getting tropical fruit notes. You're getting floral aspects. You go through to kind of middle, you get nuttiness. You get kind of caramel notes and those kind of like richer body. And then you get this kind of gentle kind of, I suppose, like a deeper floral creaminess to it. So you're getting a real wide range of flavors, and just, serving it with water, hot or cold, is a really nice way for me to, it's how I've been enjoying understanding more about the category. But I don't know from either a preference or a guest facing kind of perspective, Arielle, Aidan, you have any other thoughts on what might be kind of a hero cocktail serve for shochu to be able to kind of break through with?
Well, I mean, for me, like, I mean, granted, I'm not serving people every day, so I'm probably going to have a different answer. Like there's such variety over like what the main thrust of the flavor of like any given shochu is. I mean, like, maybe to like condense it very clumsily, like, some are quite like like peppery and spice forward. There are others that are much more like soft and floral and a bit rosy. Some have like malty mapley thing going on. And so like for each of those, I would probably choose something quite different. Although like I am definitely guilty of, or not guilty, but like fall back on the like, well, just add like some kind of citrus and some kind of daiquiri kind of interpreted thing, and then it'll probably be good, and it will probably be good. But I even more going in the direction of like a very dry martini, but then selecting the vermouth or something close to the vermouth category, so like wine based, based on those botanicals that'll like marry better. So I think some of these like peppery ones I would actually be like quite excited to try with more of like a Koki Dopo Teatro, and some of the this more floral one, the which one was that? Oh yeah, the Ryuku that I've been tasting. Definitely more of like a like drier and lighter like Koki Lillet something for me.
Nice. Aidan, any go-to cocktail serve?
I think like like served with some sparkling soda water would be delicious. And I think that nowadays there are so many beautiful different types of soda waters, so you can pick preferential flavors to you, and that's going to be like a nice kind of like segue into exploring the brand. But like La Croix have like every single flavor under the sun, so that's like a nice opportunity to play around with different flavor combos and showcase the shochu, but also do something that's like enjoyable to you as well.
Nice. The only other thing that I would add, and I suppose is don't think of it restricted as a white spirit. One of the things that I started to play around with when we first came back from Japan was actually kind of just doing old-fashioned twists using shochu, and partly because you're playing around with a different ABV, and what that helps you liberate in terms of flavor can be really interesting depending on the sugar or the bitters you're adding as an accent. And I had some amazing kind of success with some of those. So I would say, when you're using it, it's it straddles that space. It doesn't just work as the kind of cleanness and the lightness of a white spirit. It's got enough weight and body and complexity all condensed in there that it actually is very fun to start thinking about it in different serves. And again, with the way that when you change ABV of a drink and you pull it into particularly big spirit into an aperitivo style serve, the way that changes the structure and the way that you drink it, it's fun to do that with your shochu as well. So I would say that this is where classic recipes are super helpful. Pick a couple of different styles and just see how it starts to behave when you apply different styles of shochu into the mix. We've got a lot of love going for the Genshu. I think that tends to be the case. People who are spirit fans, some of that extra ABV tends to kind of really help kind of latching onto those flavors. There was a question probably towards Arielle here, is there any reason why there's more of that kind of bigger spice coming through on something like a Genshu compared to the lower ABV iterations?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I've been thinking about that, Philip, since you posted it. To run through what it immediately makes me think is like, okay, most spice flavors come from molecules, either molecules called terpenes, which is like kind of how you get like cardamom, cumin, black pepper flavors, or stuff like eugenol and cloves and other stuff like that. And for the most part, like those aren't really going to be made by either type of fermentation. So like that suggests to me that the spice notes that we're getting are probably more a product of like suggestion. So like your brain is like very, very focused on finding patterns, including for flavor. So if there's some stuff that's like maybe like a little bit more concentrated and kind of like either like reminds you of a spice that you've had before, or like you've experienced that flavor along with spices before, your brain will go to like, oh yeah, I recognize what's happening. So spice. I think with the sweet potato as a base, I'm gonna guess that comes from like the yeast fermentation, because there's a lot of like kind of yeast alcohols, esters, aldehydes, that can give like kind of a special spicy note. And I think the undilution is probably like kind of just like keeping that a bit more concentrated, and then like when it hits your palate and starts getting diluted, it like blossoms into more of a spice thing.
Rad. I'm jealous I haven't got Shochu in front of me. So there's a great question on food pairing. This is obviously like a wonderful and a difficult thing to kind of talk about in a general sense. I think it's always a really fascinating thing of, how do we make the table as a whole work better? How do we use our food and drink to work in harmony? And, I think this is where Shochu is again at an advantage. It was like many other spirits and drinks. They were born in harmony with the food that surround them. But I think there's a lot of opportunity to bring Shochu into other cuisines rather than just Japanese, partly because, a white spirit has an ability to kind of sit well with that. You've got different ABVs and you've got this range of flavors. Now, sometimes there's a question of whether warm works here, and Aviary is a wonderful accompaniment, helps, the warmth not only, again, blossom some of those flavors, but it helps kind of dissolve some of those fats, and it can be a lovely harmony alongside dishes. But I think the kind of classic approach here of, you can either go with likes, like for like, or you can start to bring in contrasts. And I think you should, this is where it gets exciting, is to just explore and play with that. Find ways in which it, again, because you have often contradictory or seemingly contradictory sets of flavors, you'll have something that's got depth and weight to it, but it's also got kind of florality or citrus or tropical notes. It gives you an opportunity to kind of straddle a different middle ground. So my advice with this is always it's a fun game. Taste away, bring different things to the table, find things that you usually love. I'd say lower ABV is usually the kind of right way to go here. Try different dilutions, try different combinations to help bring it into that bracket. But it's a wonderful addition to kind of the food pairing repertoire. And Arielle, I'm not sure if you've got anything you have as a favorite kind of as approach in terms of food pairing, or is there anything to do with Shochu at the table that you'd like to highlight?
Sorry, you put me on the spot, and I wasn't thinking about food. I mean, I quite like it at room temperature. I'd say, like, again, whether I'd have it warm or diluted or cooler. I think like the some of the lighter ones, like these like reduced pressure ones that Phil was mentioning, I would probably like not do a lot with, and kind of try to just like enjoy some of their delicacy, and especially like those paired with like fruit, I think would be particularly delicious. But then I also think about pairing drinks and snacks together, yes, especially because I drink a lot before meals. And then I mean, I'd probably be the one either ordering or pulling out like a glass of spring water and like playing with the dilution as I ate, just to try to kind of like lock in how much like more aroma was like liberated on the nose versus the tongue, like as I ate. And I do tend to make things into like a little bit of a chemistry experiment like that. But it can be like quite and I love that like interactive element for as a drinker, as a diner, of kind of figuring out what's just right in the moment.
We've got to wrap in a sec. Aidan, any quick thoughts in terms of that, or is it again similarly following a pattern of experimenting and keeping it simple?
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah.
Okay.
But I think it's like, experimenting and keeping it simple can seem like a little overwhelming, but I think of that as like a a particular like potential rather than a limitation, or like it is a creative limitation, but it's the kind of one where like just doing a little bit can really like unlock a lot of exciting stuff.
100%.
Yeah, it's a fun game to play at the table as well, you know. It's like a talking conversation. Yeah.
So we've got a session coming up next that's talking about kind of balancing flavor, but it'd be remiss to not also mention the amazing competition that JSS are holding. And having been able to visit Japan and visit some of these producers, I can't recommend this highly enough. So any bartenders out there, the applications are open now till the end of the month. We're going to be announcing finalists around the 15th of February, and then the final is going to be at the beginning of March in New York City. So this is a chance to, if you click on shochu.guide, it's an opportunity to kind of get your entries in. The Shochu Cocktail Week will be starting at the beginning of March. And it'll be, a lovely chance to be able to learn more about the category, see some of the ways in which people will be kind of using Shochu. And Silver Lyan, our bar over in Washington, D.C. will be taking part, so you can see some of the ways that the Lyan group start to love playing around with this wonderful category. But I really, really suggest you kind of get your cocktail recipes in. It's an amazing place to visit. It's a beautiful part of the world, and understanding about these incredible spirits firsthand is an amazing, amazing opportunity for you all. So get your entries in before the end of the month. But thank you so much to the wonderful Arielle Johnson and Aidan Bowie for their amazing insights. It's always lovely to be able to chat with them both, chat about flavor. I hope you all got lots away from this, but enjoy the next session, and hopefully we can see you all in person soon. Thank you very much.
Cheers, Ryan.
Thank you.